Just everyone, thank you for coming this late on a Friday, and for the panelists for being willing to join us with very little direction and not a lot of warning. So thank you to everyone who's joined. I'm really excited about this panel because I think it affords a really accessible way for folks to get involved in research, whether it's encouraging others or working with students and then getting the benefits of that for your own research, or doing research on or about your students. And I think it just offers a really accessible way to get involved for any faculty that are interested. We have 4 folks today who are going to give us 5 minutes each to talk about what they're doing, and then open it up for Q&A. And I thought we would divide it up with 2 folks that are primarily doing research with their students, and then talk to the 2 people that are more experienced doing research on or about students and student learning. And so I want to start with Paul Ulrich, who is a senior lecturer in the Department of Biology. I'm claiming you for sociology in biology, and he's the director of the program for undergraduate research in the life sciences, and he is going to talk to us about course-based undergraduate research experiences. And so, Paul, if you want to go first and take your time, and we'll go next to Toby.
I will take my 5 minutes and no more, maybe even 30 seconds less, you know. That way Toby can show his pictures.
I'll take it. I'll take the extra 30 seconds.
So I think when I hear Mindy introduce me like that, I realize that GSU is this fantastic place where normal rules may not apply, and unconventional solutions really rule the day when it comes to providing things for students and doing it. So I think my first lesson I've learned early on is, if someone says, can you do that or you can't do that, I take it with a grain of salt. So I do undergraduate research, quite frankly, and help coordinate it across the STEM departments at large. And because I have a passion about it, it got me here where I'm at. It opened doors. It keeps me sharper than I can imagine. And so it keeps me active myself in ways that I otherwise wouldn't. And I just see all the influence on the students, quite frankly. The research goes really slowly with a lot of novices who are stumbling around in STEM labs, doing things the wrong way. And but sometimes they solve problems in ways I'd never, ever try. So it really catapults them into career. And I find it keeps me a lot sharper teaching, and I still can make marginal gains every semester with this revolving door of students. As Mindy said, I really have sought out ways to crowdsource research in a way, but not lose mentorship. So what I find is that if students do conventional research in a laboratory or with a faculty member in whatever context, often they get lost in a larger group because they don't fit into a specific time slot or whatnot. Or students just can't find mentors. I mean, we have 17,000 students in arts and sciences, give or take, you know, pre-pandemic at least. And there are not that many of us, and students don't know how to interact with us productively, or to find us, or to even know who would care about them. And so there are too many students, right? From a faculty perspective, there's too little time. From a non-tenure track faculty member, myself being that, it may not even be part of your job description, and you may have to actually justify it in ways that there may be some inertia in the system, right? But embedding these things in courses and making courses where students can sign up, and then you have a defined project with enough latitude for them to work and explore, does a couple things. One, it gets it on to go solar so students can find you more easily. And 2, it makes it part of your responsibilities at the university to do this. So it carves out a time and a space where you can not only do work, but promote their career and get a little bit of research done while you're at it, and have a hoot with it, because mentorship takes a lot of time. If you have 15 students, 20 students doing research under you at the same time, it wears you out, especially as an introvert, as I am, very introverted. But so it gets it onto your schedule, gives you the time and space, the mandate, so to speak, and gets it in front of the students. But I think then mentoring becomes not a side item. So this is sort of, I'm talking a lot about the student side, what they can do. But in terms of research, I've been able to move things slowly ahead over 8 years, and now I've got a course running here, as well as a colleague in Virginia running it simultaneously at her institution, and our students are working on parallel projects, and we're weaving multiple institutions together socially in this time. It probably wouldn't have happened outside of a pandemic, right? And so I'm curious to see what comes of that grand experiment. So not only do I do experiments in the lab with my students, but they probably don't realize that my experiment. And so with that, I will, reserve my retaining time for the gentleman named Toby. If I can.
I'm just hoping my screen works. I don't know. I'm not sure how to share with this.
I don't know if Mindy, he was the next, but I reserved my time for the gentleman.
Do you yield? So let me introduce Toby quickly. This is Toby Bolsen, who's an associate professor, right, of political science. And Toby's going to discuss their work with student research through the Zukas Summer Institute. And I'm not sure if I have to give you special permission or something.
Well, I don't think I have the permission to share my screen, so you may be saved from the slideshow, but I'm not sure if that's easy to do or not, or if it's worthwhile. It's up to you, really.
I'm looking.
Weirdly, I'm able to share mine.
Oh.
You're just pushing the dots on the, you just go to the little dots at the bottom of the screen where it says more options, and then connect to a video system. Is that what you would be doing? Normally it says share screen somewhere, and I just don't, the button where it says share isn't actually allowing me to share.
Huh.
Yeah, in WebEx, you have to be a host.
Yeah, I mean, if it's as easy as clicking a button, go for it. If not, I'll just.
Yeah, I'm afraid that I'd have to get Sabrina. I could push you to the end and see if I could get Sabrina to make you a co-host.
I just changed his role, Mindy.
Oh, where'd you go?
Okay, well, it says I'm a host now, and unfortunately, let's see.
Now you're responsible for the whole thing.
Now I'm gonna have to say I still can't get it to share, so I'll just use my. It'll go faster this way now. The pictures are nice, but thank you for having me to talk. And I think, Paul, you really hit on some great things. And I guess in the end, what I would do is talk a little bit about how I've involved undergraduates in research in the work that I do as director of Zukas Research Collaborative. So Zukas started about 5-6 years ago, actually, and it was a summer institute that we have where we would bring in students for panels of speakers in the morning who talked about all kinds of different tough on crime, mandatory sentencing, judges, representatives from the state capitol. They're there for these panels in the morning, and then what we tried in the afternoon was organizing sort of hands-on experiential learning through research. And so the first year, Sarah Gershon, I don't know if maybe Dr. Gershon and I did it together, and over the course of 3 full days, 8 to 5, we did an on-the-street survey where undergrads kind of helped design this survey experiment where we manipulated aspects of a particular crime and then looked at people's opinions on sentencing. And so the undergrads sort of were involved in that, from the design to the descriptive statistics to the data collection, data entry, data analysis, and then they had to report their findings at the end of 3 days. I didn't think it was humanly possible. We got a couple hundred surveys completed out of it, and we were able to have the students present a final report. Come 5 years later, that's turned into a week-long class. It's also turned into a semester course on politics and punishment in the U.S. We built a solitary confinement cell a few years ago, an art replica that was in the front of the Arts and Humanities building. I had undergrads sort of help and graduate students work as a team at this institute. And I was going to show you some pictures. They designed mini syllabi for each of their groups. So groups will be responsible for different things. 20 to 30 undergrads at this institute. Many of them come from not just political science, but other areas. But they really, a lot of their feedback has been this is their first hands-on experience actually collecting data, designing surveys. And so last year, for instance, I was going to show 3 of these. We did, a survey experiment on support for voter restoration rights, or felon disenfranchisement laws, and exposed people to different sorts of information and then tested people's support for that. And so they get to be involved not only in that's just for sort of some of the students get to pick the groups they want to be in. So with 20 to 30 students, we've probably got 5 to 6 groups every year, and that's teams of graduate students, 1 to 2 graduate students leading each group. We've had groups create a podcast on college and prison. We've had groups, again, the solitary confinement, construction, and bringing in the designer of that art exhibition, and then actually using it to conduct a survey experiment where we had 100 people, 100 students go in the cell, take a survey while they were in there after immersing themselves in the experience, versus people who just sort of filled it out in a classroom. But anyhow, there's been lots of these kinds of studies done. They made a play, reenacted a play on juvenile injustice, where it was all about solitary confinement and the effects on juveniles. These have led to published articles with the grad students, pedagogy articles about how to merge sort of graduate mentoring, involving undergraduates in the research process, and then actually producing publishable articles. So 2 came out, and 1 came out in 2019, 1 in 2020, just kind of reporting the results from some of these studies that we've done, and the other one was on just sort of solitary confinement in that paper with a couple of grad students out of that. So I'm sorry I couldn't show you all these pictures, but I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about all this. My general experience with it has been that undergrads love it. It's been intensive. It's like a 1-week institute, 9 to 5, week before Maymester. I have a blast doing it. It's an intense week. What I've learned over time is that you have to do a lot of things ahead of time. And if you're going to have 6 groups doing different projects, I have to start meeting with the graduate students earlier in the semester, get them lined out, get the mini syllabus together so that they know what they're going to do, what can realistically be accomplished in 3 or 4 or 5 afternoons. But anyway, that's just sort of one example, and I'm happy to answer any questions or talk more about that if you have it. But it's been a great experience for me and my students.
Wonderful. Thank you, Toby. I remember seeing the pictures in the paper of the solitary confinement structure that you all built. We're going to go ahead and hold questions until the end, and we're going to move to talk to Ashley Holmes, and she's going to share with us. Ashley is an associate professor of English and the director of the Writing Across the Curriculum program, and you have done work doing analysis of student writing samples that you're going to share with us.
Yes, thank you so much, Mindy. It's great to be on this panel and love hearing ideas all across the disciplines of different ways to approach this. So a lot of my research is pedagogically focused, writing studies. And so what I wanted to kind of briefly talk about are the different ways I approach kind of pedagogical research, like the kinds of things I collect. And then I was going to give you just a preview of a study I'm doing right now. So one of the things I love about pedagogical research is that we're all already teaching, kind of like Paul and Toby were talking about. How can we weave together the work that we're doing day to day that always calls our attention with this other piece that whether it's in our job description or not, that we have questions, right? Research questions that we want to investigate with our students or about our teaching. And so I kind of think about it this way. I have a lot of student work, I have a lot of teacher work, and then I have some kind of things I can do to capture things like learning and engagement. So in terms of student work, since I teach writing, I have essays that I collect, discussion board posts that students write, reflections that they do about an assignment and like what they learned or their perceptions of certain challenging topics. And so I kind of begin to collect that stuff when I have some research questions in mind, and it forms like a data set that I can then code and analyze and look for themes, right? So whether you're teaching writing or tests that you assign or whatever discipline you're in, the typical kinds of assignments, we're already getting a lot of that stuff, and a lot of it become kind of a data set. So that's the student work piece. The teacher work, we design assignments. I mean, we just heard from Paul and Toby some really exciting, outside the box, innovative projects. And so we can kind of, use those assignment descriptions, those course designs. There are journals that publish those kinds of things. And so sometimes it's even autoethnography is a teacher kind of research. We could keep a journal about how are things going with a new class, or what do we think students are learning? So that can all become part of a data set as well, student work and then the teacher work that you're already doing. And then there's some other interventions we can do to kind of try to capture learning and engagement, which is a little more towards like scholarship of teaching and learning, which I know our expert on the panel is going to tell us more about in just a minute, Mike. And so, but things that I've done, like focus groups with students, interviews one-on-one with students, surveys, pre-test, post-tests, all of those are kind of things that whether you do them on their own or you triangulate with their assignments as a data set, you're starting to kind of capture a picture about what are they learning, what are they not learning, where's the growth, and all of that can drive kind of pedagogical research questions. So with that in mind, the kind of teacher work, student work, and trying to capture learning, I'll just tell you real briefly about a project I'm doing right now for a book I'm writing called Learning on Location. And one of the chapters is about writing on location, which is my specialty. And so it started as a research question about how writing in place, students writing in place, might impact their engagement and the kind of projects they write in the end. So what I started doing was collecting these free writes. I would ask students to go somewhere and pull out a device and write on location as kind of an invention or a brainstorming activity that would lead to a larger writing project or research essay in the end. And so these were like little one-pagers I would collect. And so over time, with IRB approval and students' permission, which we can get more into in Q&A if we want, I've collected about 200 of these. And so I'm just now in the process of beginning to kind of put them into in vivo and begin coding that data set to look for trends, themes, that sort of a thing. And it also worked out that a few of my colleagues were like, I like that assignment. Can I do it in my class? And I said, sure. Can I come collect some data from your students? So these are all things that I would have done anyway, that I believe in as good pedagogy. And it allows me to collect a data set that has led to articles. My first book was all about pedagogy. My next book is going to be all about pedagogy. So this is definitely something I love to do, and happy to answer your questions in the Q&A.
Wonderful. That's so exciting. Thank you so much, Ashley. We're going to turn to our last 5 minutes of panelist time, and then we go to big Q&A. And so I want to introduce Mike Metzler. Mike is professor of kinesiology and health, and is going to share his screen for us. He's also the associate director of scholarship of teaching and learning at CETLO, or probably more importantly, as Laura Carruth describes him, the Sodal guru. So he is going to talk a little bit about what's happening kind of around the university and the college to kind of get us excited about things we might be able to do.
Well, that's very high praise, a lot of pressure to be known as an IRB guru. What I'm going to do is, as you can tell, my speech is not always as clear as I would like it to be. So I'm going to work from some slides. So if you can't understand me, you can at least follow me that way. A year ago, just about, a group of us started a research project on the impact of the transition to all online instruction at Georgia State. And we have a lot of data that you can find on the CETLO website, but I'm going to share with you two out. When we asked instructors if it took more time to prepare, 91.5% either agreed or strongly agreed that they were spending more time preparing for their classes. We also asked them this question that turns out to be really interesting. Describe your experience of last spring semester in one word. The words stressful, challenging, exhausting, and overwhelming accounted for almost 30% of all responses to that question. If you're too busy, stressed, you're challenged, you're exhausted, and you're overwhelmed, you can make research lemonade from COVID-19 lemons. And I'm going to show you a way to do that at least one way to do that. There is something called learning analytics, and it's available for use on instructional delivery platforms like iCollege, Kaltura, and others that some of you, I'm sure, are aware of. Now, the nice thing is the learning analytic data are automatically collected behind the scenes on the platform, and they're simply there for retrieval and analysis. The key is to knowing how to find them and what to do with them. Almost everyone since last spring, summer, fall, and probably now is using some sort of online content delivery. PowerPoint only, lecture over PowerPoint, recorded lectures, media viewings. And when you are meeting your classes, you're meeting with your classes online, you are doing interactions that can be captured on WebEx and Zoom or any other platform that you're using. And you can also analyze what goes on in breakout rooms with your learning analytic data. And again, the key is to know how to find it. There are a number of kinds of data that you can extract from, again, platforms like iCollege or Kaltura. You can look at frequency and duration of viewings. You can look at students' viewing patterns. Are they pausing excessively? Are they skipping slides? Are they fast forwarding? Or are they just simply disengaged and walking away while the instructional media is being played on their laptop, or more likely their phone? You can also find out what time and what days they are doing the viewings. Are they doing them late at night? Are they doing them last minute in preparation for a quiz or an exam? Many of you are now starting to embed comprehension and review questions into your PowerPoint slides or instructional media. With learning analytic data, you can analyze their answers to those embedded questions by simply just setting up the system to do that for you. Many of you use embedded links on slides. The learning analytic data will allow you to know how often they're using the links, how long they stay on the links, and so forth. And for synchronous classes, you can use the learning analytic data to monitor attendance and engagement during classes. And what you can do with all of those learning analytic data is to correlation between those data and student quiz and exam scores. You can analyze learning analytic data along with any survey data, perceptions of content, perceptions of media, perceptions of others in the class that you might collect. And what more and more people are starting to do now is to compare student engagement and or performance in online courses from previous face-to-face classes with how they are doing that now online. And this is brand new. This is the first official announcement of something called Learning Analytics Research Services, or LARS. It is headed up by Chad Marchand and Sutla, and it's very simple. They're there to support learning analytic research from design to publication. You come to Chad, you just simply tell him what you want to do, and he makes sure that you have what you need to get it done. Chad's email is there. My role in this goes along with that embarrassing title of IRB guru, is to help people that are doing the learning analytic research studies to get IRB approval. And there's some really good news that you may or may not be aware of relative to IRB. Almost all of these studies qualify for exempt. Exempt applications are simpler and much shorter. Exempt applications are reviewed by IRB staff only. They do not go out to faculty panels for their review, and they have a much shorter turnaround. I actually had one approved in 24 hours. I probably shouldn't have told people that. And IRB is now more amenable to the use of data collected in past semesters. One of the most common questions I get is, Mike, I have a lot of data that I collected on this course in previous semesters, but I don't have IRB approval and I don't have student consent. Can I use those data? In the past, the answer was no and hell no. Now, very possible and very likely to get approval from IRB to use those data. So my job would be to help you do that. So if you or anyone else has any questions or we need assistance about learning analytic data and or IRB, please let me know, and Chad and I will be very happy to help you with. And that's it.
Wonderful, Mike. Just so you know, Laura actually said you're the SOTL guru, not just IRB, the SOTL guru. So your crown is even more impressive. Thank you, everyone, and thanks for joining back. So exciting and so helpful. And I have lots of questions myself, but I want to give other people the first opportunity. I think that we can have a small enough group, we can kind of raise a hand visually, or if you want to put something in the chat, that's fine. But who would like to begin? You can make it be me. Yeah. Go ahead, Mike. Was it Michael? Can't see.
Yes, that's right. Paul, I've got a question about your CURE classes versus the experience that students get as, like when I did undergraduate research, it was with a faculty member in a lab. It's kind of dependent on graduate students in the lab to pick up a project and do things. Do you get a feeling for how your CURE students' experiences compared to someone in a position where they're trying to work for a tenure track faculty lab?
Well, I did research with a faculty member and one-on-one as well, and so it was new to me personally as well. But I would say the question is, how do students experience it differently? Am I reading that correctly, or what? Maybe.
Yeah, do you feel like they get a good or maybe even better experience in your class than they would trying to?
From my perspective, it reduces the number of layers between them and the faculty member. That's my thing, or at least there's a structured time in which they overlap instead of just meeting in the hallway or over email. So I think it's better in that respect because they don't get lost, especially in larger groups. That's my thought. They don't feel singled out either, I think. I think it maybe reduces that. They probably feel like a little bit less intimidated or like imposters when they have a group of people around them that you can concur to the same, like everybody's in this boat. Does that answer your question to some degree there, Michael?
Yeah.
Paul, how do they register? Like but it's in Go Solar. So what is the process there?
Well, historically we started, and we still do this with a bit of an application process because I think it's in the student's best interest to know how much time it takes. And because otherwise they get in too deep. So the other thing is historically there's been a bit of inertia about non-tenure track faculty members leading research. It depends on department. But so I wanted good students to do really well. And so I would try to recruit good students to hit home runs, knowing that later I wanted to broaden that, right? Because you need institutional win. How do they get in now? They go to Qualtrics, they fill out an application that says, I have the time, here are my background, here are my classes, so you know if they have the prereqs or not. They give you their contact information so you don't have to hunt them down differently. And then you can filter that out to different faculty member overseeing the courses. The faculty members then read it to make sure that they're qualified. They reach out, and then we give them banner access. Basically, we use Professor Pro and just give them an override. That's the process. it ensures you get good students into small classes, but don't have too many drops to warrant the department dropping your course. It's a difficult process, but it's worked well for 7 years now, I think. So,
Interesting.
long-winded answer.
I have a question for Toby. I'm amazed that in 4 days your students are able to go from learning how to make a survey to collecting the data to inputting the data, cleaning the data, and then you even said analysis. And I'm wondering, you must have such good students, but how do you ramp them up that quickly? Do they have prerequisites and statistics or methods already?
Well, first of all, it wouldn't be doable without, I've had some amazing graduate students who volunteered their time. And so I just would say that none of what I talked about would be possible without the graduate. And I've been able to sort of invite graduate students, hand select graduate students that, well, at least for one group. So, like 1 year, for instance, when we did that the first year, we did that in 3 days. I didn't know if it was possible, but what we did was, on day one, just kind of divided everyone up in teams. Okay, you're going to do background research on like the theory and get some, motivate why this is an interesting question. This group's going to work on what are descriptive statistics. This group's responsible for going out onto the street and collecting the data. As soon as it comes in, this group's going to enter data, and the fun process of by hand, but with you under we can do it. And then this group over here kind of has to move through, and this group's going to analyze the data, and then we're going to come together. And so it's like really intensive. Like, here's how much time we have. I'll say I was never more stressed out than those three. I actually didn't know if we could do it. I did not think it would work out, but it did because we had a great team. And what I find is the grad students love it. I mean, my doors get beat down for grad students who want to be involved, like with leading these research teams. I will just say 2 of the grad students that help me every year, Christina LaPlante, Bailey Fairbanks, both finished and just landed tenure track jobs in the fall of last year, ones at Wisconsin. And so I was so happy for them. We co-authored that solitary confinement paper together in the New Political Science Journal. And so just like seen these graduate students who gave so much of their time was so rewarding for me, honestly, to just be able to see them get something out of it, a co-authorship, and be able to write about that in their letters on the market. But so anyway, couldn't be done without that. And then what we did realize after year 1 or 2 is it really isn't ideal to try to do that in 3 days that way. To really get a good project, what has to happen is I teach a course for the last 5 years every spring, and I've got 30 students in it, teaching 2 sections of it this spring. One's an honors college group. And so over the semester, it's just amazing how many kids want to get involved. So I would say half the students at the Institute every year or more are students that just spend an entire semester in the spring. We built that solitary confinement cell, for instance, over the course of the entire spring semester, then conducted all that research over the summer. So there has been a benefit, but that class was created after year 1 because we realized this really isn't working right to try to just throw people in 3 days or 5 days. There has to be more of an infrastructure for that. So we have learned that over time. We've begun to pay graduate students, which I'm so happy that we don't just have to ask, we can actually have them there. And so I have been able to find, at least so far, not every group does data analysis. And like I said, sometimes videos, sometimes podcasts. 1 year it was just interviews with like Peter Lindsay and folks from Perimeter who have set up the college and prison program and people who've been involved with that. So that was more of a qualitative group, but their projects have been just amazing. So I think I went far beyond your question, but it wouldn't really be possible, I guess.
You simply explained it. I was thinking that they were in those days each going through that. I didn't realize you divided up the labor, and that makes a lot more sense. Thank you. Hong Mei?
Hey, Mindy, thank you. So thank you all for sharing your amazing work. I've learned a lot today. So I have 2 questions, kind of related. One probably is for Michael. You've mentioned that you kind of compare the engagement between face-to-face and online course. How do you do assessment for the student engagement? That's one of the questions I have. Second, I know right now we kind of emphasize from college to career. So skills or competency is something we try to develop in our class. I've done some survey, like you guys mentioned, but that's student perception of how their skills has been increased by specific activity or project. But professionally, in addition to that, how do we assess the enhancement of these skills in class? That's probably the question for everybody. Thank you so much.
Well, I can answer your first question. Essentially, once you have set up the learning analytic or the whatever platform you're using to collect learning analytic data, it really becomes a behavioral analysis process. So you can count interactions, you can count questions, and then later on analyze for the type of questions they are. And we've done that already a couple of times at Georgia State. And then you can then take those same behavioral categories and observe them live in a face-to-face class.
Okay, so make sure I understand your what you're saying. So the iCollege basically for online we have some kind of data there we can analyze directly to measure the engagement, right? So to
exactly what it does.
Mm-hmm. So for face to face, are we like how do we measure their engagement? Like how do we measure the engagement in face-to-face class?
Well, what I've done is 3 times now is worked with instructors and devised behavioral observation systems.
Oh, okay.
And I go in and do live observations in class.
Oh, okay. So I see. Thank you. So for the assessment of the competency, I guess it's not limited to which one. For example, communication, teamwork, like critical thinking, all those kind of things in general. Do you guys have any suggestion how we can assess them in class? Those are seems like very important because especially right now we're in an isolated environment and we try to find ways to promote their skills. So just curious how you guys do in class.
Yeah, if I could, there are a number of rubrics that have been validated for various outcomes in higher education. And some of those outcomes are not necessarily performance outcomes. And if you go online and look for a rubric 4, you're likely to find one, and hopefully it will already have been validated.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Well, and I wanted to jump in a little bit too, to mention that, well, first, I think there is value and there's good pedagogical research based on student perception, but your student perception of their learning, that is. And so I've done some work around kind of reflection. I do some kind of community-based projects. And so a lot of that work is tracking kind of students' own sense of kind of self and growth from a, that isn't always tracked through like tests, for instance, or measured in the same way. And so, but there is, good scholarship of teaching and learning research that can show examples. I mean, basically you have to define what it is you're tracking. Okay, communication. Well, what can you collect that would demonstrate growth? And, maybe that can be achieved in a pre-test taken in the first week and a post-test taken at the end of the week that you compare, the learning or growth over the course of the semester. So for me, when I try to ask those questions of my own teaching, it's about how can I track or measure whether it's behaviors, whether it's clicks in iCollege, a certain style of writing, how will the interventions that I make through teaching throughout the semester lead to learning, and how can I track that, right? So there's not like a one way, but that's kind of the heart of I think good SOTL research is like, you know, how can we find something to measure and track to show growth and change?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great.
I think, Ashley, what I have learned, and I am completely, compared to other people on here, a novitiate when it comes to some of this, is that definitions are so integral to this. And we have these competencies at the higher level, the NACE career competencies. But, you know, what might stun people is I don't know that those competencies have ever been validated or shown to be reliable themselves. And especially for various different domains. And while they're helpful generally, I think we have to define them carefully internally or find something that's been validated that supports that. But I'm stumbling into that right now. So.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. One of the things I did in class myself, okay, my class is myself, is that as Ashley and you guys mentioned, you kind of assess something in the beginning and at the end. So one way I ask them to do is to, for example, communication or engagement. So if I give you 10 minutes to discuss something, how many minutes you've talked in the beginning, kind of, you know, estimate yourself. And then how many minutes have you discussed at the end of the semester? Do you feel more comfortable to talk to at the end of the semester? That's something I'm doing right now, but I'm not sure if it's professional enough to assess that. But anyway, thank you all for your feedback. I'm going to check online and find more resources and rubrics to improve.
And I know it offers consultations too, right, Mike?
Yeah, I definitely will reach out to him.
Yeah. Please do. Yeah, that's what they underpay me for.
So, Mike, may I ask you a question here about these learning analytics that are out there, this data? You said getting the data, figuring out where it is or how to get it seems to be a major component. For instance, Kaltura. To get that data means you have to hit a download button with a window, and it emails something to you with no indication of which video it actually came from. It comes with some kind of alphanumeric code. And I've had to totally, you know, hack into it and write browser automation to get the data. Like, does CETLO have tools able to get that more efficiently?
Yeah, that's what Chad does. He was really, really good at that. And that's why it would behoove anyone to start with Chad. He was really, really good at that.
Okay.
He knows all the shortcuts, and he knows which platform will work best, and he knows the capabilities of each platform. Our college is very limited.
Yeah, and does he have, I guess then, I'm sorry, well, I can ask. I was interested in about API-related access, but that's a coding question. I'll leave it for another time.
Yeah, I would consult Chad.
Any other follow-up questions? If not, I have a strange one. Are you up for it, panelists? I'd like to know one of the coolest findings that you've had from this type of research. And actually, I really want to know about the writing in place if I get to pick. But one finding, one kind of cool takeaway that you had from either working with your students or researching your students. Whoever wants to go first can.
I can go first, and I'll tell you, I'm still in process with my data analysis. But one of the things I'm finding from the writing on location study is kind of connecting with scholarship on experiential and place-based learning, the power of place, and kind of to Hong Mei's point, this is part of how I'm documenting the power of place in pedagogy, is by looking at student writing. And so what I'm finding is that these free writes that are these little quick brainstorm, get some ideas on the page, are making their way into big projects. Like I had one student this is pre-COVID, sit by a creek and just write. And she just chose that as a space or place to write. And she noticed all this trash and got like really angry. She had this like really visceral reaction. Her free write is very descriptive, and shows her anger coming through. And then it led to this really fascinating kind of activist, action-oriented public writing project where she made like these calls to action and set up this kind of creek cleanup plan. So that was like, for me, what I'm arguing is the way that these experiences of writing in place have kind of a very experiential component for students that lead to kind of more powerful kinds of writing and research and more engaged learning experiences. So that's just like a little preview and tidbit, and I'm looking for more evidence in that vein.
Wow, really cool. Who's next? Toby? I put you on the spot next.
Sure. Now I want to remember the question. It was the most surprising or most interesting or kind of
I think I was more technical and said the coolest finding.
Coolest.
The coolest finding you want to share.
Well, I think it's hard to follow the writing on. I think that's really cool stuff. First of all, I just want to say I'm really interested in writing on location. So I want to read your book because I want to see how you're assessing it. And so I was initially going to, I think probably the coolest thing that I would want to say is that I've seen is I've had twice two different undergraduate students decide to go to grad school because they did undergraduate research with me. They took over and ran. For a few years, I picked one graduate student who ran the summer institute with me. And two of the first two students that I've had actually made career choices based on that. One of those is Bailey Fairbanks, who's now a professor. And all these students were undergrads who became MA students who worked to get a PhD, and to sort of see that kind of whole pipeline, because one of those goes back like 8 years or almost 10 years from when I had them in an undergraduate course to seeing them as a professor now. So I think that's pretty cool. I would just say add one other thing if there's time. Like, this is a whole thing I didn't talk about, but it's more related to what a lot of you have done with research on teaching and learning on my students. And I just want to say, like, in 2014, I had the pleasure to work with Chad Marchong and Mike Evans and others I adopted an online textbook for large sections of Introduction to American Government back in 2013, Sumo Publishing. So I was part of that big APLU group initially, and I taught a lot of these huge sections of American government, 1,000 students one semester. I would just say that working with Chad and others at CETL, we were able to design a large-scale semesters long, large N, 4,000 students take American government a year. We implemented pre-post test exams. For 3 years, we tracked grades. We tracked measures of student engagement. We had time spent in textbook that we could correlate with post-survey responses on how well does actual reported engagement actually match up with actual time spent in the textbook. Current events quizzes that we could track weekly to look at the performance between online, in-person, hybrid, 4 different sections, I guess, in a traditional just 275-minute lectures, all delivering the same content, all using standardized multiple choice tests, and then these surveys and all these other instruments. And so I just think that all of that data that Michael talked about is really exciting. I've seen it's accessible. Probably a lot of if you took the mock course or whatever, you see a lot of these analytics that we can look at to see. I mean, even just simply, how often are students logging into iCollege? When was the last time they logged into iCollege? Flagging them to send these things. So I think the coolest thing from all that work, in some sense, is just been seeing which modes of pedagogy, like what works, because it's so much data. When you deal with 4,000 plus students a year, and you see that big of amount of data on grades and engagement, and you see instructor, controlling for instructor effects, controlling. I think it's been really cool to learn about how you can engage students actually online, done correctly in certain classes. It can be tremendously effective at certain outcome measures. So sorry, I went on way too long, and I couldn't resist that.
I appreciate
about how useful Chad was with all that work.
Okay, thanks, Toby. How about you, Paul?
So I'm jealous of the sample sizes Toby talks about because it gives you a lot of power. But I think a couple things I'll just tell you really quickly. I can't overemphasize the importance of TAs to the point where you train a PhD student who just loves teaching. And I tell my students with all due faith, if I die tomorrow, Mariah can walk in here and teach the class without me. And it just means a lot to them to see that I would hand that off to them. Right? Students in, I think one of my coolest moments I had is when I had the last building renovation project in Kell Hall, was piloting on new space, and somehow I got money to renovate one of those sold rooms. And we started the class, one of my first cures, on pieces of furniture the college found all over the place just for computers. And the new furniture from the tech fee was delivered in a pallet to the basement of Kell Hall near the front door. And I couldn't get it upstairs. And eventually I got one of these notes from the university, like, you got to get your stuff out of the hall, right? And so I had a horde of 14 students come down, strip a pallet, and carry furniture all the way up through the furniture. And they got to build a lab, like build furniture. And the ownership they had, that was a cool moment. That was really neat. And they stay in contact, these students, over the years. And like Toby say, like, they excel me. And I think when I see my students go on and I tell them someday you're going to be sitting in my seat, right? I say that with all due respect to them, that's going to be neat, especially when it doesn't look like this white male dude up here, right? And this is cool. So I could go on, but those are just some anecdotes. The other thing I just will tag on here is I've learned from doing work with a really talented, now PhD student in the College of Ed and Health, how different the language is between STEM and the learning sciences. And we run into walls all the time about different definitions and approaches and conventions. Like, I have no idea why APA is so valuable to people. Like, as a STEM person, I'm like, it looks so ugly, right? And she has the opposite sense. And so I have learned by crossing those divides to have just how language and definitions and talking together is important but difficult. So.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks. Mike?
Several years ago, a professor came to me and he was basically tired of talking from PowerPoints. And he wanted to know if he changed from talking from PowerPoints to working on a whiteboard would improve student learning. So we devised behavioral observation systems, and we went in and we looked at his behavior during the PowerPoint sections, the same course, and his behavior and student behavior in the whiteboard section. So we found that he was teaching very differently. What we also found was students were engaged exactly the same way. Lots of listening, taking notes, very few questions, very little interaction. So on one side of the ledger, the instructional behavior looked very different. On the student side of the lecture, their engagement behavior in both sessions was exactly the same. And it took me a while to explain to him why he got NSDs on every measure between behavior and performance in that class. So what I do now is I talk to people about pedagogical blind spots, things that are going on, many of them right in front of you, that you just simply can't see. And that was his pedagogical blind spot. He taught very differently, but students were engaged for learning exactly the same.
That's fascinating. I was like pulling for whiteboard on this, but
We all were.
Oh goodness. All right. We were quickly running out of time. I don't know if anyone has a final follow-up or anything you didn't get to ask. Oh yes, go ahead.
So really quick, if anyone can talk about maybe kind of pitfalls to any of these approaches and things to think about and consider maybe before you start, or things to include in a syllabus, or to think about before you start a research study.
Great, thanks. Who wants to go?
Well, I'll go because I get a lot of professors and graduate students who come to me, and the pitfall that I find most of the time is they come to me too late. That by the time they see me, a lot of what would make for a good, rigorous study has already been either ignored or done poorly. So my advice is to find a partner, find support and mentorship as early as you possibly can.
Great.
My my advice is to embrace the failures. That sometimes it leads to really interesting studies. There's some good research about kind of what works as a question, but there's Randy Bath has a famous piece I'm forgetting the name of right now, but it's all about like failure in teaching, and that's like studying the failures and what went horribly wrong. It can actually lead to like really interesting research and studies. So I tend towards like qualitative research, I should say. So, just trying to understand and pick up the pieces and study that. I almost abandoned a data set because I thought it went so horribly wrong, and just had an article come out, like 8 years later, because it took me that long to like let it simmer and realize kind of what went wrong and reflect on that as a teaching moment. So I try to embrace the unknowns as best I can.
Paul or Toby?
No. I'll defer to you on this one. I'm still thinking. I had a thought and it slipped out of my head, so I'll put you on the spot. By kicking the can.
I'm sorry, I missed that. Did you say you deferred to me?
Yeah, I did.
He's yielding his time to you.
Oh gosh, well, I think it's been answered pretty well. I mean, I don't know if I guess I think I really like the idea of when you do new things, or when I try new things, I get bored. I was the kind of person who would use a different textbook for American government like every year, which is insane, I know, but like I just got tired. Like I need something fresh. Even if I was using the same book for my students, I needed to read a different book. So like I guess some of the cost, I think if I were when I remember when I first was thinking about this, for instance, 8 years ago, when I was thinking about trying an online textbook. Well, gosh, is everyone going to be able to like have access? There were all these like worries I had, like, oh, I shouldn't probably do this. I don't know if people all get killed on my student evaluations because there's no hard textbook and, it's all this web-based platform and all. So I think, in some sense, that one of the things is just kind of getting past that feelings of like, oh gosh, I don't know if this is going to work, and just concerned that it might not work. And like you said, like I said, Ashley said, if it fails, like I remember Peter Lindsay told me that he taught a class one semester where he decided after like the semester, he was just going to not speak in the class for the entire semester. So the whole semester, he never actually spoke to his students and conducted a class that way. I can't imagine what kind of work that entailed, like building a class where you never actually speak, and everything was project based and there was never a communication. But Peter is quite a teacher, so I guess when I got to co-teach with him, I've been able to see a lot of times these might fail, they might work. You're going to learn something from them, and I think it sort of spices it up a little and makes teaching fun. So I guess that's my advice. If it doesn't work, you learn something from it, and you can kind of go on from there.
I will definitely second that as well. It's a big experiment, and at least when you're doing the research, students are doing research with you. If you tell them up front and you don't know the answers and you don't know where you're going, they are very gracious to you when you don't understand, and they feel legitimized by it too. I say when it comes to studies, and I do not have nearly the experience the others do on this call, I will say the lesson I was taught in my PhD early on is you go after a simple question, not the question because normally you have to decompose the question into an achievable unit, and too often it's too big. On that same note, but a different vein, I would say be prepared to decide other things in your work schedule to triage out. because it takes a lot of time to do that, especially when you're working with students to do research they're doing research projects with you. The mentoring, it's a lot. It's very valuable. I think it makes a big difference for them, but I find it takes a lot of time and energy because everyone's a different mentoring scenario.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much for the panelists. It was really, really interesting. And thanks to everyone who showed up at 4 to join us, or what is it? Yeah, 3 to 4 to join us. And I hope you all have a wonderful weekend and feel research rebooted.
Thanks, Mindy.
Sure. Hey, Toby, can I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
I mean, like after everyone's gone.
Hey, I'll hang on. I'll hang around. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. I just had I have a research follow-up question for you, and I'm probably still being recorded. Yeah, we're still being recorded, but I was curious when you did the study, I thought, I didn't hear all of it, but you said that you had people go survey people about their thoughts about solitary confinement, and then you had them sit in the solitary confinement. So how did that experience change how they, or did it not change how they reacted on the survey?
Yeah, that's a good question. I kind of wish I would have just talked about that because really, if I really reflect on that, I answered too quickly. What's the coolest thing I've ever been involved with? Having in my class build a solitary confinement cell and then put 100 people in it. Have a student. Here's another one I should have thought of. I couldn't think of off the top of my head. I had one of my students in that class spend 24 hours in the cell. We brought breakfast as lunch. She scheduled meals, and then they did a time lapse on the Juvenile Justice Information Exchange. They put a camera in the corner and then did a Facebook video on it. So that whole solitary confinement, building a cell, putting it on campus, having students build it, doing research in it, publishing an article with grad students out of it. No, that's definitely the coolest thing I will ever do as a teacher in my career.
That inspired the cool question.
Yeah, and so I mean, I should have thought of that instead of thinking about it because I was sidetracked by all this cool like learner analytics, and I was like, oh, I was all up on that track. But no, if I really think about it, the solitary confinement cell was the one. What we found was, so the grad students we brought them in with bingo balls. We rolled the bingo ball, and they got an even number. They went in groups of 5 because the cell is really small. It was 8x8 plywood cell, and there's this streaming audio of juveniles in the cell. So it was sort of an immersion into an art experience, like there was a cloth door. They weren't actually bolted in. If anyone freaked out, they could totally leave. And we kind of got IRB because, putting people inside of like a small unit and asking them to sit in silence for 5 minutes, the grad student with a stopwatch could cause, issues. So, anyway, we got that approved, but we found that, and this probably is not surprising, but we found that relative to the 100 students who took the survey in the classroom, the students who took it in the cell were significantly less supportive of, the practice on 7-point, we measured these on 7-point scale, strongly oppose, strongly support for both juveniles and for adult offenders. And then we began to also look at other factors. We had some other questions that tapped punitive attitudes. And so just in general, like even the short 5-minute immersive experience produced, on average, some type of sort of attitudinal shift, which, there just haven't been many studies that have done anything like this, like put anyone in that to test for a causal effect of like this. We can't say whether it was sitting in the cell or listening to the audio or whatever, but some part of the experience appears to, even in that one shot, have been impactful on their actual beliefs and attitudes. So I say that. Did that answer the question?
Yes, that's exactly what I wanted to know. Well, such fascinating work that you're doing. As a sociologist, it's particularly near and dear. All of the work you're doing overlaps a lot with the kind of things that I teach. So just super, super interesting.
Well, I'll have to. Were you aware of the institute? I don't know. Had you heard of the Zuka Summer Institute before that I've done?
I've heard of it in terms of like a research institute, but I wasn't sure what happened in terms of the summer programming.
Well, it got canceled last May because of the pandemic. And so right now I'm hopeful right now it's on the books, but we'll kind of see how things go here over the short term. But
Yeah.
the speakers are just great, and it's every year it's just been such an awesome experience for me. I've had so much fun with it. I guess another thought I had is the question that was asked at the end, what's the real, some of the cost of all this is to do it right. Like Michael said, there has to be planning put into it. It can't just be thrown together right at the last minute. And so I get stressed out a little bit in the spring because I need to start meeting with these, like organizing these like independent projects while I'm juggling all the other stuff. And so, that time, I think the planning to do it right, you want to plan for it. And we have learned that over the years, like how beneficial it is to get these projects lined out, even pre-collect some of the data for a survey experiment, and then just kind of spend a day teaching the students and then get them into the, if they're writing a white paper or something. But I will, if you're interested at all or have any interest in any of the projects that we talk about, I'd love to put you on like an email list and just keep you updated with
Absolutely, love to be on that.
If you have students, grad students, we had some great sociology students. Actually, no one this last year, but there was a sociology grad student at that attended the year before. So it's something that I think could be of interest to some of your students as well.
Absolutely, yes, I would love that.
Cool.
Thank you again.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it. It's nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
All right, you too. Have a good weekend.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.